You are standing in the middle of a battlefield, surrounded by the stench of rotting corpses and the moans of starving men. Their armor hangs loose over skeletal frames, their lips are cracked, their eyes hollow. And then, instead of food, instead of mercy, their commander gives a single, chilling order. Kill them all, not because they rebelled, not because they were cowards, but because their empty stomachs had become more dangerous than any enemy army. This is the story of the general who executed his own men to save grain supplies. A story so ruthless, it raises the ultimate question: is survival worth more than loyalty? To understand how a general could come to such madness, you have to step back into a time when wars weren't just fought with swords and arrows, they were fought with stomachs. In ancient campaigns, the strength of an army wasn't measured only in numbers or weapons, but in sacks of grain, bread, rice, salted meat. This was the lifeblood of conquest. Lose your food, and your army would collapse before a single arrow was fired. One Chinese historian wrote, "An army marches on its belly, not on its feet." The Romans knew this. The Persians knew this. Every empire did. But what happens when the grain runs out? Imagine tens of thousands of soldiers reduced to scavenging for rats and roots. Imagine grown men chewing leather straps just to feel something in their stomachs. Disease spreads, morale crumbles, and whispers of desertion ripple through the camp. And here, in this crucible of despair, one general chose the unthinkable. He was no fool, no reckless brute. In fact, history remembers him, if faintly, as a brilliant strategist. A man who understood that armies are machines, and soldiers are parts that can be replaced. Some sources point toward China's Warring States era, where generals like Bai Qi, the human butcher, slaughtered hundreds of thousands without mercy. Others whisper of Roman commanders who executed starving legions to prevent mutiny. The truth is less about the name and more about the pattern. Over and over across civilizations, the same brutal decision surfaced. When the food runs out, kill the men who no longer serve a purpose. This general, let us call him the butcher of grain, faced exactly this nightmare. Surrounded, cut off from supply lines, and with thousands of starving soldiers on the verge of collapse, he calculated his options. Feed them. Impossible. There wasn't enough food left. Let them starve slowly. They would rebel, sell secrets to the enemy. Or turn on him. The logical choice? End them quickly. Save what little grain remained for the few elite troops who could still fight. And so, in cold, ruthless clarity, he chose execution. The order was given at dawn. Soldiers too weak to stand were dragged out into the open fields. Some begged for water, others clutched talismans or whispered the names of their children. They expected pity. They expected food. Instead, they were cut down by their brothers. Entire ranks were slaughtered in rows, their emaciated bodies falling silently into mass graves. The executioners did not weep. They knew that tomorrow it could be them. One account describes carts of bodies piled high, while officers counted the rations saved with every death. Grain meant survival. Grain meant power. And so, with every execution, the general's army became leaner. Fewer mouths to feed, fewer risks of rebellion. By nightfall, the starving camp was silent. The dead no longer cried for bread, and the general slept, convinced he had saved his campaign. What became of him? Did this decision lead to victory or to damnation? Some chronicles claim that generals who used this tactic survived long enough to win battles, their smaller, disciplined forces crushing enemies who underestimated them. Others say the act backfired. The few survivors were too broken in spirit to fight, and the enemy crushed them anyway. But in every version, one truth emerges: history never forgives. The general may have believed he was saving the empire, but to the soldiers, he was the enemy. In later retellings, he was remembered not as a savior, but as a butcher. His legacy became a warning: a leader who kills his own men kills his own soul. And yet, this was not a unique act. In the brutal world of history, commanders have always sacrificed their own people for the greater good. Bai Qi of China, after surrounding the Shao army in 260 BCE, he executed 400,000 surrendered soldiers rather than feed them. He called it practical. Historians call it the bloodiest massacre of the ancient world. Roman decimations, Roman legions, starving or retreating, were sometimes punished with decimation. Every 10th soldier executed by his own comrades just to enforce discipline and save resources. Stalin's orders in World War II, Russian soldiers caught retreating or wasting supplies were executed on the spot. Grain was for the loyal, not the weak. Different eras, different generals, same logic. Food was more powerful than swords. Grain was the true general of every war. And when the bread ran out, mercy vanished with it. But ask yourself, what kind of man can do this? To look at starving men, brothers, comrades, sons of his land, and see only numbers in a ledger, to treat them as mouths, not men. Historians say these generals weren't sadists, they weren't insane, they were calculators. To them, war was mathematics. A starving soldier was a liability. A liability consumed food. Remove the liability, save the grain, extend the campaign. Cold logic, pure efficiency. But beneath that logic lurks something darker. The idea that human life can be reduced to rations, that loyalty, courage, and sacrifice mean nothing compared to the weight of a grain sack. It is this dehumanization, this transformation of men into units of consumption, that makes the story so chilling. Today, the story is fragmented. Historians argue whether the tale is legend, exaggeration, or truth buried under layers of propaganda. But its power lies not in the name of the general, but in the lesson. War turns men into beasts. Hunger turns leaders into executioners. And history, time and again, chooses survival over compassion. The butcher of grain may not be remembered with statues or songs, but his shadow lingers. His story echoes in every decision where leaders sacrifice the many for the few, the weak for the strong, because in the end, it is not just a tale of one general. It is a mirror reflecting humanity's darkest instinct to kill in order to eat. So, what do we make of this? Was the general a monster, or was he simply a man trapped by circumstance, forced to choose between starvation and slaughter? History leaves us with a haunting truth. Survival is the cruelest god, and when men are forced to worship it, mercy is the first offering burned on its altar. The butcher of grain will never be remembered as a hero. But his story forces us to ask a question we would rather avoid. If you were in his place, starving, desperate, surrounded by thousands of dying men, what would you have done?